Thank you both so much for being here, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. I'm super excited for this conversation about such a relevant and important topic, especially for all of us as college students. So I want to begin on more of a personal level and hear about the role AI has played in your guys' life and the work that you've done with it. And so, Ole, I want to start with you, if that's okay, and ask, do you remember when you first encountered AI?
First of all, thank you so much for having me and for all coming out. I kind of have a few moments that I can think of, and I think the earliest one, and it's probably true for most of us, is through popular culture and literature and movie media. So someone my age, it's probably The Terminator in a movie, or maybe HAL from 2001, or Data from Star Trek. So one of these kind of characters that embodies the best or the worst of kind of AI power. I'm guessing for our audience, who's quite a bit younger, it's something similar, maybe another character from a movie, but you guys also might have Alexa, like a really Gen 1 version of Alexa is maybe one of the first things you do, and you can kind of imagine if Alexa is your first impulse or Terminator, like that's a really different sense of kind of what AI's possibilities are and so forth. So that's kind of the early kind of childhood one I could think of. But probably the most impactful one, when I was your age, I was a junior in college, I was pretty interested in chess as a casual observer at the time, and that's when the Watson or the IBM Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov were playing kind of this really high-profile chess match, and I would get the newspaper delivered to my front door and like play the game on my chessboard that was kind of printed in there, and watched Deep Blue win. And it destroyed my interest in chess. Like this was no longer at least for several years. I've now kind of picked it up again as I'm older and now much worse at it. But that was a pretty pivotal moment for me to kind of see something that I kind of liked a lot. Lost interest in the game, although I probably gained a little bit more interest in the AI side. And then most recently, to kind of do my work that I do now here at Vanderbilt, about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the work coming out around ImageNet and AI generation of images blew my mind. Like to go from collection of unlabeled images and all of a sudden the idea of a cello, which to those of us who are used to modern AI image generator, these things look ridiculous, more like a Picasso version of what a cello might look like, but you could see the curve of the side, you could see the frets, or there's no frets on a cello, with the strings and the neck. And it was so like just incredibly rich to think about that a process could come up with these images that as a humanist, I really associate words, image, sound with kind of things that humanists do, and here we have computers kind of de novo coming up with some of these concepts. So those kind of three like really impactful moments I can think of. One as a college student, one as a mid-career researcher, and then of course as a child, of different ways of engaging with AI and kind of the thoughts I have behind them.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing this because I think a lot of people almost think AI started existing like 2 years ago with ChatGPT. So it's interesting to hear those examples throughout your life showing that this field has been developing for a long time. It's just maybe become a little more obvious to people in the last couple of years. Ehi, I want to ask you the same thing if you remember like your first experience with AI and how that led you into the work that you do now.
So about like 13 years ago in grad school, I was working at the intersection of biomedical signal processing. So at the time, I was trying to predict brain injury from electrocardiograms. So the idea was, since the brain controls the electrical activity of the heart, if there was some brain injury, it would affect what that ECG looked like. And so how then can we learn the patterns of this disease ECGs? And so with signal processing, it was like this very one-dimensional data processing, and it wasn't quite strong enough. And so my roommate at the time, my lab mate at the time, who was predicting onset of COPD in patients, had come across like this tool called like the support vector machine, which is like an ML algorithm when we used to call it machine learning. And it was so fascinating that it would take in all these data points from the patients, from like almost any other environment, and then it could predict with a reasonable level of accuracy whether or not the lung function was impaired. And it was like, wow, this is such a powerful thing, because we're now moving from just studying data in its state to like actually being able to like predict something, right? Or predict something, I would say, or forecast something. And so that was like, I think for me, that was like the first time I really understood like the power of the algorithm and really encountered it. And of course, I wrapped up my research, and then the school at the time, campus was going through, I went to grad school at MIT, and we're going through like some mental health crisis. And so part of what I started to think about was like, how can I then use this powerful tool to keep healthy people healthy? How can we measure a little bit more about the subjective aspects of well-being, right? Like the things you actually can't quantify, right? Like you can quantify your heart rate, you can quantify like your body temperature and things like that, but like, how do you quantify stress or how you're feeling, right? And so I spent the greater years of graduate school just really understanding how we can use ML algorithms, mathematical models to understand subjective well-being. And so that has now, where I am now, like and I call that like more narrow AI, predictive forecast AI. And now at work, I'm doing more of like the foundational generative AI. So this is really where, you're working with like co-pilots and stuff. How do we make people more productive, right? So I'm definitely very privileged to work on both ends of, or at least the spectrum of AI algorithms that I have for as long as I've done it. But at the end of it, it's really just about like helping people. And I think it's an exciting field.
For sure. Yeah. Something I think I've noticed about both of you is you kind of take this AI very tech side and bring it into these more human topics, like you're saying about health. And then Ole, you're a professor of history and communications of science and technology here, and you use AI in your classroom. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you use AI in your classrooms and how you connect that with history, because a lot of people might think AI and a more history-type studies are not always intersecting in the way that they do in your work.
Yeah, well, we could spend a full 90 minutes talking about this. One really big divide I have is I have classes that are about AI. So I'm teaching one right now, AI in society, and in that class we are both covering the history of AI, but using the tools of AI, but the topic itself is AI. So we are kind of constantly experimenting with different ideas and talking about those implications. And then I have other classes that are about other topics, but AI is one of the tools that I know there's either a lot of desire to use, or to wonder if we should be using, or we should go full force and use as much as humanly possible. And so I have a range of classes, depending upon what the topic is and what the student environment is, where I will have really different expectations and kind of encouragement and roles around how to use AI. So for example, this semester, another class that I'm teaching is on virtual reality design. And in that class, it's a mixture of kind of computer science students and non-computer science students who are trying, it's brand new to just about everybody in the class. So even the students who have really been in CS for a long time, very few of them have been doing kind of game engine development and VR development. And last year, I was more than happy for AI to be used as much as humanly possible because I knew that it was not up to the task. Like the AI generators last year were not nearly good enough to make an impact in this class for the kind of work they're doing. This year, that's not the case. They are without a doubt really, really helpful. And instead of banning them, which one thing that I think we had some impulse to decide to do is do the opposite. So this is a class that you can use AI as much as possible, push it as hard as you can, knowing that it's not going to replace the effort in that class. Like it's going to be very assistive and very helpful. It's going to let some students do much more than they were going to be able to do as quickly as possible, but it's also going to get you into trouble. I know I have one of my students here, I can see it in the VR class, and at some point it will get you in trouble if you use it a lot. Like maybe you've already hit that point, I don't know. And learning where that is such an important part of kind of our process of using AI. Is like, when does it help? When doesn't it help? What kind of things is it good at? And I try to find opportunities to make that a natural learning experience in the classroom, as opposed to me just telling you, no, for this don't use this, for this you can use this, for you not to, have that be kind of a natural part of the experimentation and learning process. But it is a hard, and I know those of you who are here at Vanderbilt, as most of the audience here, you probably have 5 different classes, and you probably have roughly 5 different AI policies from your professors in each one of those classes. And they might not make sense compared to one another, right? You're trying to figure out, we're all trying to figure out, where is this fitted well? Where is it going to help you? Where is it maybe going to hinder you? What kind of expectations do we have for learning outcomes and so forth?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as a student here. Do you notice that there are any main misconceptions students have about AI when they come into your class? Or are they surprised by how you encourage them to use AI?
My guess is I both allow and encourage more AI use in my classes than most of my colleagues. And so my students are surprised when I say, go ahead and use it, that I really mean it. Like you can push it. I want to see how far you can push it for some of the classes. But there are like other classes, like a first year writing seminar where I would approach it very differently based upon where you are in your college career and the kind of material that we're doing in the class. My biggest surprise around AI is actually not with the students, but it's with my colleagues about where the origins of their policies have a lot to do with kind of policing and preventing cheating, when most of my student anxiety is around when should I learn this for job placement, what are the skills that I want to make sure I have out of here, am I going to compete with somebody who didn't have constraints placed on their AI? So it's a very different kind of viewpoint that I find many of my students have, but a good portion of them, and I talk with them, I mean you, there's a wide range of opinions on AI in this room and across the campus amongst 18 to 22-year-olds as well, some who are really concerned about what is it doing to their learning style, to what they learn, to their brain, and recognizing that it's not like all 50-year-olds have the same opinion about AI and all 20-year-olds have the same opinion about AI, that there is a wide range across discipline, across background, across kind of life goals, learning styles, and we just haven't yet figured out how to manage all of that difference.
Yeah, I think that leads really well into what a lot of this conversation is about, which is the role of education in this changing world of AI. And I think what you're saying is completely true, that there's a lot of mixed emotions around AI. I noticed as a college student myself, there's a lot of fear around it. What is it going to do? Is it going to completely destroy the world? And so I'm curious to your perspective as someone who looks into history a lot, is AI distinct from past technologies that have come? And like, for example, when electricity was created, people thought it was gonna like burn down cities and were really afraid of it. Of course, now we can't imagine our world without electricity. So is AI distinct from all of these like technical revolutions throughout history, or is there something unique about it?
That's for me.
Yeah, either.
I'll give a quick answer, which you can probably predict is yes and no. The question is it unique or is it like every other technological revolution? I would say every other technological revolution was also quite unique. So it is different and uniquely different than many of the other ones that have come before. We were talking a little bit at dinner earlier about the kind of pace of these kind of presumed like a large scale social innovations, the internet, maybe social media, before that, telephone and TV and so forth. And they're kind of colliding, they're overlapping in a way. So I think right now we're in a moment where a lot of our AI cultural assumptions around AI are also being affected by our experience on the tail end of kind of the social media and the iPhone and the phone in your pocket experience, where that realm has a lot more attention is being paid to some of the kind of unintended consequences or kind of negative externalities associated with always on with social, and that's merging into kind of our opinions around AI in a way that wouldn't have had there kind of been more distance. But one of the things I really focus on in my technology classes, the history of technology classes, is we have this way of talking about technology as if it's like got a force of its own. And the term is technological determinism that is often used. And if you've taken one of Professor Bess's classes, for example, he teaches the same book, where there's a sense of like inevitability, like the technology is inevitably going to either happen or come about and so forth. There's like little we can do about it. And you might say like the television or the telephone kind of had this inevitable, or electricity had this kind of inevitable consequence. And what the authors of this concept really push is that that's not, we have choice. We have ways of kind of pushing back or helping to mold the outcome that we want. We don't just have to kind of passively let it happen to us. It's not that AI is going to do the thing, but we choose to make decisions both individually and as a society that are going to encourage or allow or restrict the development of these technologies in ways that we hope are socially beneficial. I don't know if we've been very good at that, but we have that possibility.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on that, Ehi?
I definitely think it's unique, and for a lot of the reasons that Ole has already mentioned. But when I think about ML, or AI as a field, it's been around for a very long time, right? But I think what makes this season we're in very different is in the past, right? These things were usually hidden behind products, right? Like, if you're scrolling through your Instagram feed or Alexa or Facebook, what is that? TikTok now, So it's usually something that you would interact with without realizing that that's what you were interacting with. And so in some sense, only a group of experts, directly interacted with this thing that's so powerful, and you could in some way mitigate for some of the risks, right? Like you spend a lot of time thinking through what you don't want it to do or what you want it to do. But where we are now, AI has become the product. Everyone is interacting with it, right? Even we as technologists who are creating this technology is learning on the go based on how people are interacting with it. So it's almost like, it's been let out into the wild, and we're all collectively being surprised by the different ways it can be used and or misused, unfortunately. And so that's what I think also makes this a very unique point that we're in. And also, with the social media rising, with the mobile phones, technology, everything is always in our pockets. We're always on the whole time. No filters in terms of the information that's coming in. It's created this supercharged environment where it's really made AI this thing, right? That's really affecting all of our lives in ways that, or in ways that are much faster, I think, than almost any other technological advancement. So I do think it's unique in the way, it's currently unfolding, but to Ole's point, maybe every other technological advancement has been unique. Who knows?
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, like you said about how we're getting to use this technology as it's developing. It's like when new models come out, it's immediately put into the hands of everyone. And because it's such it is very controversial, and so there's a lot of social pressure around do you use it, how much do you use it, what should you use it for? Is that something either of you notice? And what do you think that has the impact on how people are viewing this technology with all of the social thoughts around it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're having this conversation over dinner about how in an academic environment, maybe you have different policies about what you should do, whether you should use it, don't use it, so you have to keep track about all these rules. And I was yeah, in my own world, you better be using it, right?
Yeah.
It is highly encouraged and probably even enforced in some places where you have to use it, right? There's almost no way now to do your job without encountering or using AI in some way, shape, or form. And so, on the one hand, I can imagine the anxiety around that is then how do you upskill fast enough, right? And because of just how productive it can make people be. And, I was giving this example about how trying to onboard into this legacy code base at work, you can imagine lines and lines of code. That would probably take you some time to understanding what are the dependencies, how do we get this working? Where do you come in, right? But now with a product like GitHub Copilot, you can probably get a summary of all of these things and read through it as fast as you probably can, right? So maybe something that could take you a couple of days could probably take you hours at this point. And so you have all this more time to do a lot of other stuff, right? So it's really supercharging productivity in a way that, it's a very furious space, I would say. So yes, that's the anxiety in my world is more how can you upskill as fast as possible? How can you keep, up to date with this really, really fast changing technology? And that was the perspective I had until I had this conversation. I was oh wait, in an academic environment, it's probably the opposite, right? Don't use it, in some cases. And so it was very interesting for me to see the duality of both of those. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I'm sure all of you here can relate to this. I have one class where we had to sign a contract that's I will not use AI at all. And then another one where we were struggling with the homework and the teacher was just ask ChatGPT, it'll explain it well. And so it's very confusing as a college student to know when you're supposed to use it. And so it really brings up the question as if the university has a responsibility to equip us with skills with AI, because you're saying, it is required to know how to use it in a lot of future careers. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around what the responsibility of the university is to equipping us with skills that are becoming very necessary in an AI world.
Yeah, so many thoughts on this. So I talk with students all the time about, informally in classes, informally in office hours, or in events like this, or just in working on projects. And kind of to the last question, the range of reactions that students have to the variety of AI policies that they're encountering, to their own expectation of what they think college is meant to be for, and kind of the way we often see college in movies and television shows, about this kind of great moment of wrestling with great thinkers and kind of the identity formation and so forth, and the way that AI is impacting or maybe even kind of impeding some of those classic learning motifs that we think about, but then also looking to the 3 years after and noticing that certain fields it's absolutely required, other fields are probably still kind of working that out, and wondering kind of how you go from one modality of learning as a human, and one modality is kind of using this as a learning crutch, to using this as a tool you need to learn itself, so you can kind of be more effective or produce more, or whatever the version that might be. And I think this is new for every university, and I don't see a lot of places like, well, that university is doing it exactly right. Everybody else should be doing this. I think the impulse that Vanderbilt and most universities have had has been a really good one. Has been faculty should decide what happens in their classes, right? That's been the policy of the university. It's why you have so many, as opposed to the dean should decide or the chancellor should decide, but that the decision should come up to the individual faculty member. And if those of you who are seniors in the room, you may remember, excellent, we got a senior. When ChatGPT first came out, the initial policy was it's covered in the honor code. The honor code says you can't use unauthorized digital assistants, I think is the phrase. And so therefore you couldn't use it unless the professor said, go for it. So it was banned by default and go for it. And then about 6 months later, the university decided to switch that around. And to make it, unless the faculty says don't use it, you are welcome, you should assume that it's okay to use these tools. And that was done not, from my point of view, from the university trying to say, these are tools, you should use them. It was trying to make sure that faculty had a reason to make a decision about it. That they had, if they didn't want it being used, they had to say so, as opposed to just doing nothing, and therefore we can kind of pretend like it's exactly the same as before because the honor counselor handle it. So that policy, I completely agree with. I'm glad that I get to decide in my classes what my AI usage is. And my AI usage is different than a lot of my colleagues in my department, for example. So I'm glad that my department chair didn't tell me this is what history classes need to be like, or this is what CMA classes need to be like. However, what that's left us with is 100 different policies or 500 different policies kind of across campus, and where I think that universities can move next, and I hope they do, and I'm happy to help Vanderbilt try to figure this out, is what's the difference between a policy and a strategy? Like how do we signal to students and to faculty how to structure the kind of learning that might be happening in a way that is legible to you all, so you know, like let's say you're a student who really does want to learn these various tools through a humanistic viewpoint or from a chemistry viewpoint or whatever the case might be, and you want to know what is a pathway that's going to kind of build upon itself so that by the end you've learned all the important things that you want to know that are central to what you need to do to develop those skills, but then you've learned to enhance your capabilities through AI kind of by the end of your career. And right now it's pretty hard to figure out how to make that set of navigation. And it's equally hard, I think, for faculty who are not doing this 24/7. Like I'm thinking about stuff all the time, but most of my faculty, most of our colleagues are not. Of how do you articulate which areas of what you teach are good, are well augmented by AI, and which ones are not? Like which ones do you really want to keep personal and human? And likewise for students. I don't know how frequently you think about these questions, but there are certain things of learning that you probably want to keep as human as possible for as long as you can. And you really want to think of what can AI do to augment what I'm doing as opposed to compete with my own development as a learner. So getting the language to identify what kind of learning should be human and needs to be human first before we augment it, or should always remain human, is I think one of the challenges that we need to kind of shift away from policy into strategy.
Yeah, do you have thought, like being outside of the academic world, someone working with AI, what do you think is the role of education now? Because it's not like education now is gonna for sure secure you a job with all of this change. We don't know, like that's something I think a lot of us fear. So
Yep.
what do you think is now the role of education?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think I saw a quote. It's like in 2023, the Harvard Business Review. It was like AI would not replace humans, but like humans with AI would replace humans without. And I thought that was very striking, and it has stayed with me ever since because I'm like, that is so true. And it was funny, like Ole was talking about this earlier today about like a company that had laid off about 11,000 people who they felt could not upskill fast enough with AI on the job, right? And so it is, in terms of like what I would say is don't be anxious about it, right? AI as a tool, as a technology is here and is here to stay. Like, the cat's out of the bag, is not going anywhere, right? So I think part of what we now have to think about, which I think he so eloquently put is, what kind of learning, should you preserve and what kind, should you augment with AI? That's one aspect. But then if we also think about like the job landscape, right? Entry-level roles right now are increasingly becoming automated. It's getting harder, to get those kind of roles. And so as you navigate like your college career, you have to start to think about, what are some of these other qualities, right, that is distinctively human that you can learn here in college that AI cannot replicate, right? Your ability to be adaptable, right? Emotional intelligence, being able to collaborate with people. These are soft skills, right? Like, when you have these job interviews and they're like, tell me about a time when XYZ, right? Like, those kind of skills, right? Those are the things that you now have to be able to be intentional about developing because that's really what will make you stand out, right? And that's really what is now becoming baseline for employability right now, right? Like, because almost anyone, speaking from like a software engineering field, like if you can prompt like an AI model, you could probably generate code, right? But an AI model is not going to teach you to be emotionally intelligent or how to adapt or understanding like cultural nuances or having context about situations. And so some of those soft skills I think universities have to be a lot more intentional about equipping people to get those skills, in this new phase we're in.
Yeah, I think that's very important for all of us to think about. It's like just the specific focuses of education. We have to emphasize these things more because they can't yet be fully replicated by a machine. And that really leads into this whole topic of like, what is our humanity in a world of AI? If AI is smarter than us at writing code, what is our job now? And you both were kind of talking about this, but do you still feel like is there value in having AI-free environments? Because you both work with AI a lot, but I'm curious your thoughts on when you decide to keep AI out of your life and when you think it helps.
Absolutely in the AI-free environments. I'd probably extend that even to technology-free environments that can be very restorative, can be very helpful, can kind of center the thought process and kind of where we're doing. As far as when I do and do not choose to use AI as a professional in my own work. So as an academic, we academics are supposed to be experts on things and a very narrow section of things that I get to be an expert on. And I attach my name to that output, right? If I publish a paper, it has my name on it and so forth. And I'm pretty hesitant to use AI in most of the kind of higher level areas of something that I am going to kind of claim as original to the thought that I have. But that's pretty unique to the role of my job. And there's all sorts of jobs that you produce content or reports or whatever the case may be, where the name attached to it doesn't make quite the difference. And so it feels like very much the same thing. You're both working on a report, but because one of them is really kind of meant to represent the collective thoughts that I have upon this particular topic, I'm not as likely to use AI in that environment for, say, a history paper, the kind of writing and research that would go into a work of historical work, where code, for example, is not something that's normally part of the domain of what an historian is doing. So I'm much more likely to say, well, I'll go ahead and use it to write some code to help me do some analysis that maybe I turn into a graph or something like that, or to generate an image that, again, is not necessarily part of what that kind of core works. So I bounce around all the time based upon what the task is, what the kind of audience is of when I think to do AI. But I personally don't use it an enormous amount in what I would consider like help me do the kind of work that I would normally do as an academic. I spend a lot of my time building things with AI, experiment with AI, figuring out ways to put it into different kinds of environments, but less so on the kind of traditional work that I would do. And that's probably because of the kind of job I have and kind of the age I am in my job and so forth.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. I think for me, one thing that really, concerns me about AI is the our ability as humans to be critical thinkers and to analyze, right? Like to be logical. I think that's something that's so unique to us as humans. And I sometimes worry that, not sometimes, I do worry that with this current onset of AI, like some of those skills will be eroded, right? I tend to think about like the calculators. Like growing up, I used to know like this multiplication tables in my head, right? Like I don't know if that was useful or not, but I did have to learn them as a kid. But with calculators, who needs that anymore? Also, like the last cell phone number I memorized was my mom's, right? Like after that, like you have contact books, right? Like, and so I tend to think about like what would that be? What would the equivalent for that with AI, right? Like what are we losing as a society? And sometimes like it's not going to be until after the fact that we will realize some of that. So I think for me, things that require like my critical thinking and analytics skills, I would usually not use AI for that because I want to make sure that I am, exercising my brain and my analytical muscles in that sense. So one very trivial example I give is at work. If I am trying to write an email, I really need to compose something. This is really trivial, right? I would actually write my email myself, right? Like, and then maybe use Copilot for a coach or to edit it, right? As opposed to writing a prompt to tell Copilot to generate the email for me, right? Like, and so these are some of like the very minor decisions that I make because I'm like, oh no, right? This is your voice. You're gonna, really sit down, compose this, and then maybe edit it with Copilot and whatnot, right? Like, and for some other person, maybe they don't care about that, right? Like, and that's okay. So I think for us, it's really just deciding, what is uniquely you? Like, what do you really cherish about yourself that you really do not want to outsource to AI? Another thing for me is also building relationships, right? Like, I think part of what also makes us human is our ability to be in relationships with one another, right? Like, and so being able to cultivate those relationships, nurture those relationships, which I think social media has, done more harm than good in that area, right? Like, how do we still keep that solid and not like have AI take over or ruin that in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, and that's really, I think, the core question is what does it mean to be human? If it's not our superior ability to do these things that AI is now becoming so much better on. Curious if you, from your humanist perspective, have thoughts on what does it mean to be human? Is your perspective on that changing as this technology develops?
Well, that's a great question. I know a good chunk of you are in the Being Human class right now, probably, if you're first-year students. So you've been thinking around these questions. I honestly don't think that the rise of AI has challenged my sense of kind of what it really means to be human. Like writing an email faster is not one of the things that I associate with my humanness. And being good at problem solving is one of those kind of, I think, canonical examples we have around kind of maybe other forms of life. But to use those as kind of measures of what I mean to be human when there's ranges of like humans who are good at that thing, does that mean that you're a better human because you solve a puzzle faster? No, we don't think of it in that sense. So I would say that those kinds of skills that we're associating with what AI is getting good at, I personally don't really associate with what it kind of means to be human. And there's kind of scientific definitions of humanness that are around like the emotional connections, kind of social, emotional activity, social connection, and kind of cognitive ability, I think are often kind of some of the pillars of those. I don't know if personally I also either identify so strongly as those that would kind of make me human, and maybe I'm conflating a little bit like what it means to be human versus like kind of what meaning I have in my life. But I also wouldn't define there's a list of things I can tick off. Here's the 3 things that make meaning in my life or human. I have ones that I care about a lot right now. Right now I have teenage children at home, and raising them well has been an important part of who I am, and I'm proud of that. But when I was 20, I didn't have kids. That wasn't part of what it meant to be human. I had an entirely different set of kind of definitions of what meaning was in my life or what human meant in my life. And clearly people 500 years ago or 10,000 years ago had very different kind of senses of what kind of meant to be human. But in none of those would I feel like my humanness is really being challenged by those particular sets of skills. So if you are defining who you are kind of by you're a good email writer or you're a good coder, probably keep thinking about what it is that you're finding meaning in yourself, because those are probably not the right places to decide that's what defines you.
Yeah, that's great. Because I feel like I've even experienced that where like I love writing and I'll write something and then I'm like, wait, the AI just wrote that so much better than I ever could. So like what you have to really focus on, like what is actually distinct about me, like what do I want to define myself? Do you have thoughts also from your greater perspective as a Christian? Does this influence at all how you think about what it means to be human and where we find our meaning if it's not from these?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a huge part of my life. When I think about what it means to be human, we're all humans, right? But we're very distinct individuals, right? And to your point, yes, what it would differ across whoever you're talking to, different stages in life and things like that. But for me, things are a little bit more foundational in terms of what it means to be human. One thing I like to think about is lived experiences, right? Human beings experience things. AI simulates, an AI would never be able to experience, the joy of graduating from college, getting married, giving birth to a child, or the grief of losing a loved one. That's just not something AI would ever be able to experience. Now, with the right set of data, it might be trained to recognize patterns and maybe, predict or detect what that looks like in data, but that's not the same, right? That's not an experience. So I think collectively, human experiences is something that I think makes us human, and that differs across life experiences, where you're from, cultural nuances, and things like that. Another one that I think for me is really core, especially as a Christian, is purpose and meaning. One of my favorite readings from Scripture, from the Bible, is from Prophet Jeremiah. And in this conversation, God is talking to him, and he's like, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and I set you apart for a purpose, right? So there's this, it's almost like there's this, I definitely strongly believe that I was brought on this earth for a reason, right? And so part of how I journey through life is building and strengthening my relationship with God so I can then discover what that purpose is or continue to unravel, right? Because it is a process, what that purpose is. So I think for me, being human is really also understanding purpose and meaning. Why are you here? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? And that's something that AI could never replicate, right? In any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, because I think there can be so much fear on AI, but sort of using it as an opportunity to look at what's bigger than us and what our true meaning is, instead of just seeing it as a threat to what we're used to, is a very important way to think about it. We're almost getting to our question and response section, so please start thinking of questions that you have. And I want to ask a final question before that. And this is something you were getting at a little bit earlier. But is there anything, what about yourselves do you hope or think that AI will never be able to recreate? Either one can take it first.
I mean, the first thing that come to mind, I think, kind of the obvious ones, the human connections, the people that I'm involved with my daily life and beyond. I don't see there a meaningful way of replacing. I also really don't tend to think of AI as this replacement. It's either me or the machine. I mean, it is a way that you can choose to or choose not to kind of mediate your experience with if you find it to be helpful. So I don't really tend to think of it in that sense of which part do I keep separate or what is it competing with. I really tend to think of it much more as a choice made when convenient and a choice ignored when not convenient. And I don't tend to put it in quite such like existential, like this is a creature that is going to replace humanity and what side should I be on that type debates as often. Although those are really fun debates to have as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hard to have like very specific, like, oh, you can't, this is what you can't replace or what you cannot do. I consider myself a cautious optimistic with AI, so I tend to think about like, what can I use this to do, right? Like, to Ole's point, like, there's definitely a school of thought of people who are like trying to create like this super intelligent, almost godlike AI that would eventually extinguish humans and, I don't know, send us into outer space. I don't know about that. But I tend to think of it as a tool that we can use as a force for good, right? Again, going back to like, my Christian foundation, like, the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself and to love God, right? Like, and so what does loving my neighbor as myself mean? Like, how can AI help me do that, right? Like, it's in, using AI to solve like real world problems. Like, how do we help, use it to like help with like healthcare crisis or hunger crisis or, improve education, improve access, right? Like, how do we use it to bridge the gap between the West and the developing countries, right? Like, and so I tend to think of it more as a tool, as a force for good. And how do we use that as a multiplying effect for us as humans? How can we help augment our impact on the world, on society, in, loving our neighbors as ourselves? Yeah.
It's funny, that question, I asked a very similar question to a group of students the semester before ChatGPT came out. It was an innovation class, a history class, and I asked them to kind of make me a list of the things they thought. I'd given them early access to a pre-ChatGPT GPT, so it was probably 2 or 3, and they were experimenting with it. And they had all this long list of things they thought AI would never be able to replace, and it was things like humor and poetry and a bunch of stuff that now. And what I loved about this example was when ChatGPT came out, most of them were seniors, so they had graduated, and then it came out 4 months later, and I got all of these emails from students in that class saying, I think I need to update my list. like here, and it was a much, much shorter list after that moment. And they also focused on things like love somebody, but almost all of the doing things that they thought was pretty sure, I'll never get humor right. They erased those.
That's actually a very good, maybe not random, but good control trial. Like, you should publish those results. I would love to read it. Like pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT. That'd be nice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's definitely taken a lot of people by surprise what it's actually been able to do. But like you're saying, it doesn't, we might have to think about it a little differently. Yeah. But I know it's something I'll be thinking about after this, of what are the things that I really want to cultivate in myself that will not be replaced. Well, thank you guys for this part of the discussion. We're going to move now into our Q&R.
Howdy there. To qualify myself, I have used sport vector machines, and I am currently using the grad level AI called Magic, and do a lot of AI in my computer science degree. And you guys seem very optimistic, and I'd just like to offer a little bit of counterpoint to that, in that I think that the job market is horrendous. I don't think that people are going to be replaced by people who know AI better. I think that AI, first of all, in these tools is already in the process of this speech, I've already used $2 worth of tokens, just letting the AI run itself to try out code on my computer continually until it gets it right, and then report to me when it's done. And so I feel like it feeds on itself more. Obviously, we're going to have some impact on that along the way. But I think that the jobs report that came out recently was really bad, even though AI is seeing such boom in all this investment and whatnot. And I feel like a horse talking about chariots and the buggy that's coming along, and being about cars won't take my job because all this previous technology didn't, warfare or chariots or whatever. And I do feel like this is kind of an existential threat. And if we do lose work, what happens to us then? Even if we have this ideal society with all our needs taken care of by the robots, and it's peaceful and it's lovely, UBI, whatever. Like, are humans fulfilled without work? Like, how do we deal with that? So, yeah.
It's interesting that you thought this was optimistic.
He said he was providing a counter viewpoint.
Yes. No. We're optimistic. I definitely put myself somewhere pretty in the middle between kind of optimism and pessimism. I don't know the answer about the jobs. We're in this moment where that is a definite possibility that the current tech, particularly in the tech industry job market, is a direct cause of AI efficacy, right? It's good enough that people are able to not have to hire as many people because of the skills. That is a definite possibility. It is also possible that a lot of the people making employment decisions are doing it a little bit based on what they think AI is going to be like in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and are kind of making bets that might not turn out to be the same way. It is equally possible, and there's a lot of good evidence for this one, that our job market sucks for a lot of other reasons, and that AI is one of the easy place to kind of point to. And I do not say I know which one it is, and it's this one, it's not that one, but it is clearly not obvious that it's definitely one of those, and definitely not the other two. So it's probably some mixture of all of those. I am really pessimistic on the techno-utopia visions that we'll get a good enough AI that'll take care of our needs, and it'll result in some form of universal basic income, and we'll live in this kind of happy life where we have to ask questions like, do humans need to work? Because all we do is lounge around and eat fruit and float around in like WALL-E type environments. I'm so much more pessimistic on that because there is no point in human history that I can think of where a rapid technology of increased enormous efficiency resulted in widespread beneficence for everybody. In fact, every single example resulted in the accumulation in much smaller numbers and genuine pain and suffering for the much larger numbers until it was unbearable enough to cause some form of revolution. Like history says that is the repeatable version of this that is more likely than we'll decide to just distribute it equally, and there's so much of it, we can all have enough of it. I really hope that's the case, but it's not inevitable for sure. It's never happened before, and so if that's the result that we want, we need to be organizing and planning and agitating for that 5 years ago, but if not then, tomorrow, because it's not gonna happen on its own. Does answering your pessimism with more pessimism help you feel any better?
I mean, I was seeing like that. If that's the best option and it still seems bad to me, it's just all bad. But yeah.
I mean, the best option is that it's not AI taking your job. It's an economic downturn. AI is being pointed to, and in a couple of years, we'll see. In general, most technologies of enhanced efficiency do create more jobs in the short to medium term than not, and then it'll be normal. And if it's a normal cycle, you'll be happy in a few years. I don't know if it's good if it's a normal cycle, right?
All right, I'm a freshman pre-med student, and my question is, there's a lot of conversation right now about how AI can be used in healthcare, whether that be in simple genome sequencing, well, I say simple, but AI makes it simple, running tests, or there's even been talks about AI completely replacing doctors or surgeons. What are your feelings about how AI is trying to be incorporated into the medical field, and how do you think it could be integrated into the medical field while still maintaining human interaction and compassion and all the things that you would want when you go see a doctor?
That's a very good question. AI has been integrated in the medical field for years now, right? Like even when I was a graduate student, part of what we did was using data from hospitals, and I had some friends or colleagues who actually got their algorithms successfully used in hospitals by doctors. And so not even just, and it was across the spectrum, from predicting disease states to maybe helping triage patients in hospitals to operations research, trying to optimize for like supply and logistics in the healthcare supply chain. So it's something that has been happening for a while. I think what we're seeing a lot more of now, because the technology has gotten so much better, is in the field of imaging, right? So we're seeing a lot of very high accuracy, being able to detect things from images like radiography that we haven't at rates that we've not been able to see for years. And so professor at MIT, Regina Basile, one of her research, which I think came out last year, is able to predict the occurrence of breast cancer a whole 5 years earlier than any human could, right? And so we're seeing very fast advancements. And part of that is the power of these technologies to be able to process images in the ways that are a lot more efficient than humans can. Another area that we're seeing a lot of improvement in, and thanks to this new conversational agents technology, is really in the patient-doctor relationships. In the US healthcare system, I hope you've been to your PCP, they spend a lot of time taking notes, right? They're usually almost always in front of their computers, typing, trying to make sure they record everything that's been said. Sometimes one of the things that usually amuses me, after a doctor's visit, is going back to read the doctor's notes, and I'm always amazed at how much he or she had captured from our conversation. And I'm like, were you even listening? Did you actually digest the information? I was saying, no, you were really just typing. And so there's a lot of technology that's out there now. Microsoft has some of those out. There's this startup in Canada called Rosalind.ai, which part of it is this ambient technology that listens in, does patient intake, and then is able to take this, like a scribe, so to speak, and then allows the doctor to really focus on this human relationship, right? This actual doctor-patient relationship. And I think that's really powerful, right? In terms of how AI helps medicine. I know they're oh yeah, AI would eventually replace doctors. I don't think so, and I hope not, right? Because ultimately, you want to be able to look at AI as a tool that augments, right? How can we help doctors get to decisions faster? Or if you think about in the case of cancer care, right? We're having some of these AI models being able to research literature in ways that are just not sustainable for humans, right? But then they're able to bring out some of all those rare treatment regimens and things like that from research that doctors can then process, read, understand, and then decide on the best course of treatment for a patient. We're seeing it in drug discovery as well. And so I think it's a good thing that we're having AI in the field of medicine and field of healthcare. What we do need to figure out is a way to help doctors, assist them in making decisions, as opposed to looking for a way to take over their jobs. I don't think that's very productive. It's also, another aspect of this is also building trust, right? How then do we build trust with physicians, right? Because AI, especially in its current form, is generative, right? Sometimes it hallucinates, it doesn't always get things right? Doesn't mean it's all bad, right? So what are some of the things that we can build into it? I know pre-Gen AI era, there was a lot of talk around interpretability and explainability. And so even in working with doctors, if you make a forecast, you have to sort of explain, the model has to show some explanations, okay, this is how I got to this decision, so that the doctors can also understand how those decisions have been made. And so I really want to be able to get to that point in this new era, how do we then also build in interpretability, explainability, so we can build trust with physicians as well. So there's a lot that we can accomplish, I think, in the healthcare space. But I'm definitely not one for replacing doctors, that's for sure.
How far do you think we are away from that point?
From replacing doctors?
Or not replacing doctors, but to that theoretical point where we can confidently integrate AI in healthcare and we can have full trust in the system. How far away in years term do you, or either one of you, think we are away from that?
I can't predict the future, that's for sure. Not one of my skills. I know we are already, I know, right? I wish I could. I know we're definitely already doing that now, right? AI is already being integrated in hospitals, and it's been for years. In terms of when can we fully trust the system, I also don't know if we should ever fully trust an AI model. We should always keep our critical hats on when interacting with these models. And so I would say we're already at that point where AI is it widespread? Maybe not. Probably not even developing countries that don't even have some basic technologies, right? but we're already starting to see a lot of integration in healthcare systems.
Earlier in your discussions, you talked about how you think AI can't have experience. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on some of the AI welfare programs in companies like Anthropic, and some of the thoughts surrounding the uncertainty that there's any forms of experience in these models, especially considering some of the cognitive models around consciousness and their similarities to the prediction-related processes that kind of go on in these LLMs, even if not LLMs, but potential future architectures, and if you have any thoughts just surrounding the potentiality of consciousness.
And to quickly add on to that, we also wanted to ask about your thoughts on lived experiences. So you both touched on how lived experiences give us humanity or make us human in a way, but what will that look like, or what will your reevaluation be when or if AI does become conscious and can have a physical presence as well?
Absolutely wonderful and challenging questions about predicting a sense of consciousness for LLMs. So these are personal, random thoughts that I'm having on this question, as opposed to considered professional opinions doing their research on AI consciousness, which is, I don't think we're going to recognize it in any meaningful way. If what we're looking for is based upon the experience that we have of what we think we understand consciousness to be, and the way we have studied it in humans and maybe in some other kind of animal systems where we're trying to answer similar questions, my guess is that it is going to be highly controversial, and we're going to have a long time before we as humans come to an agreement on, that one, that's it, that hit consciousness. Now we need to make some sort of changes. Right? There are high-profile news stories you probably read about researchers who've already decided that their model hit consciousness and published about it, and they got fired for it, and so forth. And most of the community suggesting, no, that is really a different understanding of what consciousness means. If you go over to our psychology department and ask them to kind of define what consciousness is and where we'd find it in LLM, you're going to get 15 different answers. And if you go over to our neuroscience department, they're going to give you a different set of answers. So I suspect it's going to be incredibly controversial, and probably pretty not just controversial, but divisive about different sets of human communities who have either different philosophical, religious, moral, financial stakes at what that outcome is. And I don't know how we as a society are going to decide that, okay, that's the one that for all of us we agree on now. Rights need to be given. We need to make different kinds of legal arguments or understandings for it. That is to me one of these great open questions. And if I was a interested 18 to 22-year-old on these topics, pretty high likelihood that these will become potentially relevant in your working lifetime. And that might be a really interesting place to devote your energies now to kind of start laying that groundwork for where you think those barriers are going to be, how we're going to recognize them. One of the kind of open questions that I know kind of scholars and researchers in this field kind of have as a kind of a joke running bet is, are we going to decide we have kind of found intelligence in a computer system, in an alien system, or in an animal system first? Like, are we going to decide that whales actually have consciousness, or are we going to decide that computers have it, or are we going to discover it outside of our solar system? And at different points in my own career, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years, I would say the odds have kind of moved around. There's a strong period of time before the rise of kind of LLM systems where alien intelligence seemed like it was, we're going to discover that pretty soon. We've got bigger telescopes. We're noticing biometric in various exoplanets that have the sign of organic life. We're probably going to get there before we get to this wild idea of computers that can think. And then all of a sudden, that has really flipped around, and I expect we might have a couple more flip-flops on that. So I didn't give you a definitive answer, but that's the way I think about a question like consciousness.
It was a solid response. It was a question and response.
Thank you so much for the fabulous panel. In honor of Jane Goodall, I would welcome your perspective on how protecting the environment helps us to maintain our humanity in a world impacted by AI.
Yeah, I definitely think we're called to be stewards of our environment. And so it's something that we should all be doing, right? Like, how do we protect our environment? And that particular, this particular topic has become even more important now with the onset of AI, when you think along the lines of like energy use and really what it means to power a lot of all these machines that are behind the technology that we're doing. So the way I tend to think about it is, on the one hand, there's a lot of focus on responsible development of AI, and we tend to do that. At least we try to make sure we're developing responsibly. At least I can speak for where I work. Making sure at least you're considering, to a large extent, like ethical or bias or considerations in these models that you're developing. So there's a lot of focus on like ethical development, and there's a focus on the companies, and like, you guys have to get this right, which is great. We should be doing that. But we also need to start having very serious discussions about like responsible use of this technology as well, right? We have like very powerful tools in our hands. What does it mean as a society for us to use this responsibly? What are lines that we should not cross? When I think about like the development of this technology, I think along the lines of like 3 different stakeholders. One obviously is the government, which obviously are in a place where they should be setting policies and governing policies around like how these technologies should be used or developed. And then the other stakeholders are the actual companies themselves who are developing these technologies, and they do have certain incentives to either push forward ahead in one direction or the other, right? But the third stakeholder, which is society, who actually gets to use this technology, I think, for the most part, it can be a lot more vocal about like what we want to use this for in a way that, to your point, protects the environment, or just in general, like what does responsible use of AI look like?
Yeah, thanks for that question on the day of her passing. I think Goodall is such an interesting character, talking about AI, both for the environmental stewardship aspect, but also the thinking aspect, right? So much of her work was challenging a prior generation or two's conception of the uniqueness of humans and thinking and social relations and so forth. And to kind of have this moment now where we're having similar conversations, but maybe we're on the chimpanzee side of that intelligence explosion in some number of years is really worth thinking about. The environmental question is, here's one of the kind of pessimistic viewpoints I have on the way that we've decided to develop primarily AI through business models as opposed to kind of academic research models based upon the scale of what's needed. Solving climate problems is one of the, if you look at the literature around kind of why should we find value in these systems for the last few years, kind of before they became great coders. So before they were great coders, they were going to help us solve the world's most intractable problems. They're going to help us solve UBI issues, or they're going to, climate change is one of the ones that's really going to solve them. So we heard a lot about it's going to solve climate change, it's going to help us solve cancer, help us solve climate change. And I've seen no actual work on it solving climate change, and a significant amount of attention paid to the energy it takes to run these things, and with no real end in sight. Like, this seems to only be increasing, and that like difference between how you sell a new technology and then the kind of actually what happens when you take something from an interesting lab experiment and try to scale it. I think 90% of the problems that I have with AI right now, despite being a great enthusiast as well around AI issues, have to do with the difference between it's an interesting experiment that can happen in a research lab or in a university, but when you scale it to the whole world, all of a sudden a large number of problems that don't seem to be a concern when it's an experiment come to the forefront. And obviously energy use is one of those. And there are many other ones as well. But it's one that is a really good reminder that was one of the promises we had to invest in it. And all I've really seen is it's enhanced the problem and hasn't done a lot to advance the solution.
Hi. I just want to ask about, in the Western society, we very much have this culture of productivity and just efficiency. And I think we've been fed this line over and over again of using AI is going to give us more time. But also, I think historically when technology progresses, the need and demand for efficiency meets that like progression. And so I'm kind of wondering like your thoughts on like, do you think we'll actually get more time for like more like soul fulfilling work, like this human part of life that the AI can't do, or is it really just feeding into this loop of productivity and like making us move even faster?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is it depends, right? So the gentleman who asked the question earlier is able to sit here in Veritas forum while his computer is running lines of code in loops, right? If he had to do that by himself, like he probably wouldn't be here, right? Like, and so in some sense, yes, right? AI will free up time, right? I think part of it now is what then do you do with that time, right? Do you become like more hyper productive and then you do more stuff because now you're being empowered to do that, right? Or do you then take that time to, I don't know, invest in human relationships or, serve people or, do good in the society, right? Like, so I think whether or not AI would free up time, I think is true. It will, because part of what AI is really good at is automation. And once you automate things, you don't have to do it manually. So then the question now becomes an individual one. Then what then do you do with that, right? Of course, on the one hand, like society is, this hyper-productive society that we're in incentivizes us to do more, right? Like do more and more and more with this time that you now have. And maybe in some cases that's what's called for, right? In certain seasons of your life, right? Like, but there needs to be a balance in terms of you deciding that now that you've had some time freed up, like what then do you do with it, right?
And my answer to that is kind of related to that technological determinism term I used previously. Like we have a lot of options. Like, we should have a lot of options, and that's less a technical question and more a society question. Like, how as a society do we want to decide to give us time back, as opposed to just increased efficiency? Because all the examples certainly lead towards increased efficiency, right? Like you can now write 5 emails instead of 1 email, or you can work on the plane and on the train and the boat. Now that we have Starlink, we can go anywhere. We can still we can do work and work and work. And that's a really kind of a society issue. And if you look back at benefits to society historically, it hasn't been a new piece of technology or a new efficiency tool that gave us the weekends, right? That was political mobilization, that was kind of labor movements, it was changes to government and to policy, and those are the places that seem to be able to mobilize to get the impact for the result that you want, and waiting for the tool to like magically open it up doesn't seem to have been in kind of the recent history of the West the way that anything's ever worked. So my answer to that is it's a social and a political problem, and to try to find a social and a political answer to that, to allow that technology to have the result that we or you as a society want it to have, as opposed to kind of just letting it be by kind of the general laissez-faire market mechanics, is probably going to lean towards greater optimization and proficiency and decreased salary.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm a music education major, so I love talking about AI within the classroom setting. So I've talked a lot with my psychology and my education professors about the negative effects that AI can have on the brain, particularly what you guys were talking about earlier with like diminishing critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. So my question would be, do you think these negatives outweigh the parts of AI that enhance our education? And if not, how do we use AI as a tool instead of hindering like our problem-solving abilities and learning developments?
Fabulous question. One of the research projects I work on is an NSF AI Institute thinking about what it means to bring AI into K-12 learning environments. I'm the kind of social impact ethicist on that group, as opposed to the designer of how to bring more AI into schools. And there's so many unknowns is probably the best way to think about it, in terms of when technological interventions, particularly at youth, that youth being an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old, we have all these ideas about kind of brain formation and learning styles and so forth. There's a lot of unknown, and it's hard to do rigorous testing on other people's children. Like, not that many parents are enthusiastic about that. So we have relatively little information and a fair amount of kind of natural resistance to kind of pushing some of those questions too hard. such that we end up getting, and I think quite rightfully so, a lot of our attention is being paid, like how can we try not to replace any of that learning that is happening, but can we use these tools to make other parts of the education experience smoother, more efficient, more effective, more enjoyable. So for middle school style learning, most of the focus is not on how do we have a 11-year-old interact with more AI, right? Like that is, there are very few people who kind of want that outcome, but there definitely are some. But instead it's, can we make those learning experiences more personalized to that individual? The teacher is able to personalize the education experience at the right level or based on topics that are of interest, or can we find ways of having the busy work of being a teacher be reduced, or the superintendent of the school district can use these tools to help manage their system more efficiently or whatever that case might be. So that's kind of one way is as education professionals of trying to find as few ways that interfere with that kind of direct learning process. But then there's these really genuinely open questions about, are there ways that actually interacting directly with AI could enhance those learning problems? One of the ones that I'm personally really interested in is flipping the expert learner model upside down with a 12-year-old, and instead of having the AI try to teach them, like as in the place of what the teacher would do, have the student teach the AI. And then have that AI go take its test for it. And if you did a good job teaching it, like great, you can kind of see that result. And there's a lot of research that suggests like teaching things is the best way to learn things. And here we have a really patient learner, that AI. So there are kind of other ways we can structure that don't need to be the same, well, you have a teacher that's teaching or you have an AI that's teaching, and we should compare those two. Like that doesn't seem to me to can be the right comparison. Like, we want to avoid putting the human and the AI in competition with one another and deciding which is better. Instead, we want to find kind of more creative, dynamic ways to enhance that system, that it gives as much of that human-student, human contact and interaction as possible and minimizes all those kind of other areas. That's the way that my institute is addressing that question, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I came across like a couple of, actually there's one study run by the World Bank. It started out as a pilot in Nigeria. Now it's been expanded to South America, I think Chile, I don't remember. But it was in this city where you had students who didn't know how to use a computer. And it was a 6-week pilot study where you had a teacher walk them through learning via like Copilot. Like first taught them how to use a computer and then taught them how to use Copilot, like to learn English. That was what they were trying to learn. And at the end of the 6 weeks, of course, they had measured them. They took a test prior to that and then after that as well. And at the end of the 6 weeks, there were a couple of like very interesting outcomes. One was once they calculated all the statistics, there was like a increase in the standard deviation. I forget the exact number, but it represented like a learning of 2 years that was done in only 6 weeks. And so AI, or specifically Copilot, and the way the study was structured helped accelerate their learning. The World Bank study. The other thing was like it served as a rising tide. So compared to, first, these students were randomized into this program. Of course, you can think about like ethical considerations around that, like who gets access, who doesn't. But this ended up serving as a rising tide, such that people who were in this program also excelled in other subjects in school as well. So it did serve like as an accelerator for learning. And then the third result was that the results were progressive. So the longer they stayed in the program, the better they did. And so it was just very fascinating to see people who came into this 6 weeks prior, not even knowing how to use a computer, learning how to use a computer, and then interacting with Copilot to learn like English, and then have those effects like spill over to other areas of their life. There are a couple of things. There was an instructor in the room, right? Like they didn't just like go off and do whatever. It was a very structured program, right? Like so, there's definitely a lot of good I feel like AI can do for education. A lot of it has to be like teacher mediated. Like I don't think you should just let them do random stuff. But it was a very good pilot, and now they're trying it in other countries. And I'm hoping and confident that we would also see similar results there. I think part of it too is also the other one I came across, which I think OpenAI now has adopted, is Khan Amigo, right? So by Khan Academy, so they created like this tutor assistant that was serving both the teacher and the students. On the student side, it wasn't actually giving answers, but it was serving as a coach. And so it was able to actually tutor the students. And then on the teacher side, it was helping the teacher to create personalized learning plans for the students based on how the students was learning, the difficulties they were facing. And so it was, that's something that, yes, as a teacher, you want to be able to create learning plans personalized for a student, but not always feasible, especially in like large classrooms. But AI, this Khan Amigo was able to actually do this. And I think OpenAI now has adopted that for like their education offering for ChatGPT. So there are spikes that you're starting to see, like some of all these tools being developed that are helping to better serve both educators and students as well.